All right. Well, good morning, everyone. So this morning I'm going to be going through the first chapter of James. So if you have your Bibles, your phones, or whatever, you can pull that out and follow along. That'd be great. And so whenever I decided to do my sermon series on James, it was kind of all brand new to me. I didn't really know anything about the book of James, and so I kind of had to research it a little bit to find out what was going on. And James is a really interesting book. I really like it. James is kind of different from the other New Testament books. It kind of has a different tone and urgency to it. When you read James, you come away with the feeling that it comes with kind of a different perspective in regards to Jesus. And that's probably because it was written by Jesus' own brother. It was written by James. Well, I mean, technically, James is like Jesus' half-brother, right? Because, Mary had Jesus through the miracle, but then, Mary and Joseph had kids of their own later on. So, they're half-brothers. But they're brothers. Yeah, so they're brothers. So how many of you have older brothers or sisters? How would you like it if you had Jesus as your older brother? Talk about pressure, man. Because whenever Mary and Joseph got on James, they were like, James, why can't you be more like your older brother? And James was like, I don't know what you want from me. The dude's perfect. What do you want me to do? That'd be so much pressure. I couldn't do that. But either way, it must have turned out all right for him because he ended up writing this letter. He ended up writing James. And so a little background on the book of James. James is writing this letter to early Christians who are being persecuted. And these Christians are very poor, and they're being persecuted specifically by the wealthy of society. And so the church is facing this massive pressure about what to do, and they're kind of cracking under, and they don't know where to turn. So the book of James is actually the oldest manuscript that we have of the New Testament. Many scholars believe that it was the first book written in the New Testament. James was the first person that we know of to write a letter to the church. And so James is also very interesting because it's structured kind of weird. He kind of just jumps around from topic to topic a lot, and you'll see that here in chapter 1. So there are multiple ways that you could break up chapter 1, but I'm just going to make it nice and easy for you. I'm just going to split it right in half. And so verses 1 through 18 basically dealing with how to face trials and suffering, and then 19 through 27 about how to deal with trials and suffering. And so in this first chapter, James really focuses on where to go during times of suffering and where to look during trials. And so a big theme that I want you to pay attention to here in this first chapter is where are these people going to find the answers to their problems? Through all this suffering and depravity, where are they going to find the answers to the big questions that they have? People ask out, they cry out, who has the answer? Where can I go to find these big questions that I have about life? Where can I go amidst all this suffering and hurt and pain that I'm going through? Well, let's find out what James has to say about that. And so at the very beginning of the book, verses 1 and 2, it says, James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations, greetings. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Man, he just jumps right into it. Consider it joy whenever you face trials of many kinds. He doesn't start off light, doesn't warm up the reader with a nice little story. He just kind of jumps into it. There's that urgency I was talking about. So right off the bat, James is talking about suffering. He says that there's going to be trials, there's going to be hurt, there's going to be pain, there's going to be hardship. And you have to find a way to maintain our joy amongst that. And it's interesting to me that this would be the message of the first New Testament book that's written. Because do you know what the first Old Testament book written was? It was Job. And Job is all about hardship and suffering. And it's so cool because it's almost like God was telling the church the exact same thing that he was telling the Israelite people when they were starting out. There's going to be trials. There's going to be pain. There's going to be hardship. But you have to find a way to maintain your joy. And you have to know that I have not left you. I have not forsaken you. I will see you through this. I can redeem this. I think that's so powerful. Perseverance is a big part of this first chapter. So let's begin reading this first half of chapter 1. Back in verse 2, I'm just going to read through to verse 18. So consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. Believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position, but the rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they will pass away like a wildflower. For the sun rises with the scorching heat and withers the plant. Its blossom falls and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich will fade even while they go about their business. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Don't be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. He chose to give us birth through the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of all he created. And so James, in this first half of the chapter, kind of captures human suffering. These people are suffering, they need help, and they don't know where to turn. So do you know what the number one reason is about why people don't believe in God? You know what that is? It's suffering. That is the number one reason. Suffering. Just the age-old question of why do bad things happen? Nobody can figure it out, it seems. Why do bad things happen? Why do bad things happen to me? If God loved me, why would he make me go through something like this? Why? Why would he do that to me? Tim Keller, in his book, The Reason for God, talks about this issue of suffering, and he shares this story. I think it's really good. He says, I knew a man who had lost most of his eyesight after he was shot in the face during a drug deal gone bad. He told me that he had been an extremely selfish and cruel person, but had always blamed his constant legal and relational problems on others. The loss of his sight had devastated him, but had also profoundly humbled him. He said, as my physical eyes were closed, my spiritual eyes were opened. I finally saw how I'd been treating people. I changed, and now for the first time in my life, I have friends, real friends. It was a terrible price to pay, and yet I must say it was worth it. I finally have what makes life worthwhile. So, though we are not grateful for the actual tragedies themselves that we face, we would not change the insight or the strength that we've gained from it for anything, right? Through a basic and cynical lens, we can see suffering happen in our world, and we can say, God, where are you in this? But through a little shift in perspective, we can see the truth. Why couldn't it be possible that through God's lens, there are good reasons for suffering to happen to us? And what James says is interesting. He says, consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. James is reminding these people who are suffering, hey, there's a reason for all this. You're not just suffering for no reason. Your faith is being strengthened, so rejoice. I think that's so cool. He encourages them to ask God to give you wisdom, who will give generously whenever you ask him. But look at verse 6. It says, but when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. What is he saying here? Now, when James uses this word doubt here, he's not talking about doubt in like the belief of God. He's not talking about that. He's referring to those that are double-minded in this passage. And that word double-minded is a big deal here. The Greek word dipsukos, it's only used twice in the whole New Testament, only used by James here. And it kind of means to be inconsistent or fickle. And so James is confronting the Christians who kind of have one foot in the door, one foot out. They're kind of not really sure what to believe. They're double-minded. They're of this world, but also of heaven. That doesn't really work. They don't really know what they're doing. They only pray selfish prayers to advance in this world. They only pray for materialistic things. They pray prayers full of ego and pride. And so here's that theme here. Do I look to God for the answer to my deepest desires, or do I look for the answers that this world gives me? They cry out, who has the answer? Does the world? I don't think so, no. So moving on to chapter 13, the people start to make excuses. They say, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. The people are saying, oh, God is tempting me. I just can't do this. He's making it way too hard for me. I want to follow him, but this is just way too hard. Instead, I'm just going to abandon my faith so I can be comfortable. I'm just going to, that'd be great. If I wasn't a Christian, I'd have so much money and I'd be living the good life. That's what I want. That's what will satisfy me, right? But we just read about this in verse 9 before. It says, but the rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they will pass away like a wildflower. For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant. Its blossom falls and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich will fade away even while they go about their business. The rich will fade away like a wildflower. You will not find your happiness in money. You will not find your happiness in comfort. You have something so much greater you could have. Don't settle for something less. Again, they cry out, who has the answer? Does money, does comfort? No, that will not satisfy you. So the first half of chapter 1, James says to look to Jesus. Look to him for guidance. Ask him for wisdom. Don't be double-minded. Don't be tossed by the sea, tossed by the wind. Be completely all in with your faith. So now we look at the second half of the chapter. So jumping back into the text, just reading through 19 to 27. It says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror, and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. And so a good portion of this text here kind of talks about being slow to anger, or slow to become angry. He talks about how we should get rid of our moral filth and all the evil built up inside of us. The people that James wrote to here were starting to become very angry with their situation. They were kind of sick and tired of being pushed around with all these rich people, and so there were starting to become talks of a revolt. They were going to revolt against this oppression. They were sick and tired of it, and so they wanted to revolt. They wanted to seize what they wanted. But James kind of rebukes this idea of a revolt. He tells them that human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. He tells them to get rid of all moral filth. James is condemning not only the violent acts of these people, but also the violent rhetoric that started to take place here. James tells them that those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongue deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. James just kind of gets real here. I love this part because he basically just asks them about the true consistency of their faith. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. Man. He talks about actually acting out their faith, because when they do that, then they will ultimately be satisfied. Again, these people are asking, who has the answer? Will looking to my prideful desires give me the answer? If I just give in to hate and just seize what I want, if I become selfish, will then I be satisfied? No, you will not be satisfied. When they decide to stop freaking out about their situation and realize that things could be worse, and they start to look after orphans and widows who are in distress, then maybe they'll be satisfied. James kind of reminds them that, hey, things could be worse. There are people in worse situations than you. Look after them. I love that. I think that's great. My favorite part, though, of this whole chapter is the second half of verse 27. It says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. And this is where we find our answer. This is the answer we've been waiting for. Today, we are constantly living in this tension between culture and what society and the world tells us we should believe, and between that and what the Bible and Jesus says we should believe. And we're constantly just pushed back and forth about like what we should believe, what's true, what's not true. And these people that James was writing to were living in that same tension, very much so. All over the chapter, James addresses this. He tells them to look to God for the answers to your problems and your questions. And throughout history, people of all walks of earth have tried to answer the big questions about how life really works. How does the universe work? What are the answers to the big questions in life? And you look back through history and you see all these worldviews and answers that people have come up with. And you see like the Enlightenment era, you see the modern era, you see the postmodern era that we're in right now. People have tried to find meaning in life through science. You got scientism, you got naturalism, you even got scientific naturalism. You got rationalism, existentialism, deism, atheism, all the ism words you could ever think of. We have all of those. Throughout history, we have constantly tried to find answers, and with no success, because we kind of just come up with something, and we look at it, and we go, yeah, that seems pretty good, let's go with that. But then after time goes by, we start to just look at it more, and then we just go, no, I don't really like that, let's come up with something new. And the process just goes over and over and over again, and we just keep coming up with new stuff with no success. It's not really the answer. So Tim Keller, I'm a fanboy of Tim Keller, so I'm going to quote him again. And so Tim Keller, in his book, actually, that we have to read for this class preaching, so I'm hoping to get maybe a bonus point for this. So he puts this together just so well. Whenever you're reading a book and the author just says something so good that he just kind of articulates an issue that you've been wrestling with in your mind so well that it just kind of clicks and you're just like, oh man, that was so good. This is kind of like that for me. And so he brings up 1 Corinthians 1:20, and I'm just going to quote what he has in the book here. Paul cries out in 1 Corinthians 1:20, where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has God not made foolish the wisdom of the world? In Paul's day, the cross and the atonement made no sense with any of the reigning worldviews. The philosophers treated Paul with disdain on Mars Hill in Acts 17, and hardly anyone believed his message. But answer the question. Answer the question that Paul is asking. Where now is the wisdom of that world? It's over. It's gone. It's forgotten in history. No one believes those worldviews anymore. And such will always be the case. Philosophies of the world will come and go, rise and fall, but the wisdom we preach, the Word of God, will still be here. It will still be here. The Christians in the first century that James wrote to were being tempted to be double-minded. They were flirting with what culture and what society was telling them, and they were starting to believe that that was the truth. And James is telling them, don't be polluted by the world. Don't be double-minded. So this morning, what I have for you is simple. It's so simple, but I feel like we can easily forget it between that tension that we're living in. And it's that we can be confident that Jesus has the answer. Whenever times are hard, you're just going through a rough patch, whenever you're just going through a time of suffering or confusion, whenever you're asking yourself whether going to Ozark is really what you should be doing, whether ministry is for you, whenever you just ask yourself, man, I just wish I was going to a public university so I could just go party it out, that'd be so fun. Or I wish I could go to a public university so I could get an actual degree so I could financially sustain myself. Or maybe you're just wondering whether this whole God thing is worth it. Listen to me, we can be confident that God has the answer. We can be confident in that. And that's proven in history. And it's certainly better than any of the other alternatives that the world has given us. We can be confident that Jesus has the answer. So who has the answer? Does this world or does Jesus? Because I know what side I'm picking.